Hey friends, in today's video we are going to be using the Altenew Twin Blooms stamp set here and creating depth and dimension within our watercoloring. Now we're going to use just the stamp set, but I wanted to let you know that it does come with a coordinating stencil if you love ink blending just like I do. But today we are going to be focusing on these new color palettes that I've just received, and we're going to play with these a little bit. There are two different new ones here. And this lighter one is the one we're going to be focusing on, and it is called Lush Terra. The other one, the bolder one, is called Bold Ember. Now this one here, as you can see, I was messing with at the bottom of the page because I did not have another printout of this swatch card. And I just was playing around because I realized those colors would blend effortlessly. So that's what I was playing with there at the bottom, was just the blending aspects. And all of these paints are made to blend together. Now I'm just going to take off my stamp here and kind of play around with the placement. I have an idea of just wanting a portion of this flower on our card today, and I want to be able to see 3 or so of those leaves, which is what I was pointing out there. We're going to attempt to make that sentiment at the top straight. You always can trim a little if it doesn't come out perfect. But I also wanted to tuck this little thank you down here in the corner, just to have two sentiments there on our card. I thought that would look really elegant. So we're going to stamp this with our Stampwheel 2.0. I'm just rubbing the stamps here because they've never been conditioned or used before, and I want a really clear stamping. So that just helps remove some of the packaging and production residue that's on the stamp the first time you use it. So we will ink this down. And remember, when you use the Stampwheel 2.0, just like with any positioner, you have the option of stamping again if you so choose. So we will do a second stamping here today just to give us a little bolder of a print. But it actually stamped out really good the first time. I just always like to add a little extra. So we'll go ahead and add this. I am using Altenew's pigment ink here. So we will touch it with a heat gun just slightly before we go in with our watercolors, as it does take a little extra time to dry. So there we go. That is our panel, and it looked perfect when I stamped it there. So now I'm just going to heat this with the heat gun just briefly, just to make sure that doesn't smear any, which it shouldn't, but I just like to do that. So I'm going to open up our Lush Terra here, and I'm going to activate these inks by spraying right into the palette. You want a lot of water in there just so they can activate and move around really well. Now what we're going to do here is spray the top of this panel, and I noticed it was buckling a little bit, so I was going to push it down here with my pokey tool just for a second. Then I decided to spray the glass mat, and that's all it needed. Just a little water underneath it, and it holds down beautifully. Now, I went straight in with this brush, not realizing it had not been completely cleaned, so I'm going to show you how you can just make that part of the project. So that water I put on there had pink, a little, just a tinge of pink in it. And I was already going to go over this with this periwinkle color of blue. So I just went over it and made it our own. And I actually love the ombre-ish look that it gives this background. So I'm just going over this portion of the background with our colors here. I'm not going to go over where the sentiment is because I want the sentiment to be the first thing you see there at the top. So I'm just going to kind of blend these edges here so it covers exactly where I want, and just kind of meld them into the background. And I'm just using water here just to kind of blend them back in. So I'm going to dry this off just a tad so we can move on to our next color. It's not completely dry when I'm done, but it does dry pretty well. I'm going to put some fresh clean water on my desk there. I like to use my glass mat as an extra palette of sorts. So I just added some water, and then I wanted to dilute this dark purple down. And we're going to put the first layer on our petals. Now, I like to look at coloring, no matter what medium I'm using, in kind of a similar look. So when I approach watercolor, I look at it as the same as when I approach ink blending. The lightest layer is first. So same with alcohol markers, same with stenciling, my ink blending with stenciling. I always go in with the lightest color, and that's no different here. So we're going to give a light color to all of our petals, and I'm going to be thinking in my mind highlight. The tips of the petals is where the highlight is going to be. That's where the sun is going to be caught on the petals first. So the highlight is going to be preserved, and you'll see as I don't go all the way out to the tips at first, and you'll see me also dip more into water towards the edge of the tips, and that lightens the tips. Now, if you get too much water or it's too dark on the tips, you can always add water, dry your brush, and then touch the tips where the water is, and it will soak up the color on the edge of your tips into the brush, and that is one way to lighten it if you do actually get it too dark and you want it lighter. And you might see me do that here some. But you know, with watercolor, you always can attempt to fix those little boo-boos when you make them, which is the beauty of it. There's always some workaround. So I'm going to just keep going into the edges first, the crevices first, making them, you know, the first area of attack, because they'll always be the darkest, and then blending out lighter and lighter, trying to make those little itty tips the lightest. Just going in here with water mostly to blend out that line right there. I am using cold press watercolor paper from Altenew here in today's video. That's what I stamped on, and it's great for watercoloring. The cold press allows the colors to move with the water really well, and it does have a little bit of tooth to it. That was one reason I went ahead and stamped it twice, just for good measure, because of that tooth and getting into all those little nooks and crannies on your paper. I just love how dark this pigment is in the pan. Matter of fact, a lot of the colors in these pans look really, really dark, but when you dilute them down with water, they are just such a soft color, especially in this palette. So I really, really appreciate that. The opportunity to be able to change those colors to that color that you're after. And I really wanted to start light and get deeper and show you layering with watercoloring. So now we're going to go in. I was just feeling the paper. It is still a little cool at this point, which means it's not completely dry. But where I'm pointing out here with a dry brush is the crevices. It's where those shadows are going to be, where one petal folds over the other, or one petal lays on top of the other. All of these areas are going to be darker. So I'm going to go in with pretty much hardly any water on my brush. It's just a little bit of water. And this is where you see the true color of that pigment. The less water with the pigment, the darker the color. The more water, the lighter the color. So you don't need to add white to lighten your palettes. You just need to add water, which is why I was using it earlier to lighten it. Now it's spreading it out on my glass mat because that gave us the lighter color. So now I'm adding water there to my glass mat and dipping into it as I want to lighten it towards the petals, into the petals for that light source. But I want it to stay deep down in those crevices, which is what I'm focusing on in this second layer. You see how dark and deep that is? It's just gorgeous. The color is beautiful. It's so pigmented. It's just gorgeous to work with. But then it drags out, and as you add a little more water to it, each time I go over to the right, I'm adding a little more water to my brush because there's water on my desk there, and that water helps me drag it out and make it lighter on the ends. I'm just showing you the highlighted areas there that I'm leaving light. And then I'm going into a different petal here, one that's not too close to another, so we don't smear them, which I'm to end up doing a little bit of that in a little while. I'll show you where I was gung-ho and going a little too fast and working on too wet of a petal underneath, and I will show you that. But here I'm doing the same thing, really dark in the crevice with a really strong pigment, and then adding water to my brush and dragging it down. Those little crevices on the ends of the petals, those are folds in the petals, so they can get a darker contrasted color as well, where it's folded in. And then you work around it to bring that color to it, but not wash that depth away in those folds. Here I am doing the same thing, getting into those crevices. I'm going ahead and showing you each of these just so you can get the full tutorial in today's video. I know it's repetitious, but I know when people craft with me, they do like to see more of it rather than morphing through lots of it. So since this video wasn't too incredibly long, I went ahead and left all of these layers in, all these different parts in. So I hope you'll stick with me to see the final project here at the end. It actually went pretty quickly, and I've only sped it up one time so that you can still see enough of the project to get a good idea of how these techniques are done. So I really want to focus on the teaching of the technique, because it is this technique itself is dry on wet. I mean wet on dry, I'm sorry, wet on dry. So my brush is wet, but my background is dry. I didn't spray it all first, to get it all to meld by itself and blend by itself. The paper is relatively dry. So that gives you so much more control, which is a lot of times people watercolor to lose control, but I myself still like to remain in control. So this is my favorite type of watercoloring. So I thought it would be the first one I would go in depth with because it's the one I feel the best about. And I just enjoy being able to add all these little details, and I think it really adds depth to the finished project. And it doesn't matter, which type of medium you're using. If you take the time and you add these cast shadows in here to your florals, you'll always get a really good result. And it's always the same technique where you put those cast shadows underneath other things. Because if something is laying on top of something else, you're going to have a cast shadow underneath it. So now this line right here, I struggled with just a little bit, and I'm going to need to let it dry a little bit because it got a little too wet because the petal next to it is the one I just colored. So I kind of decide to go in and work at the top part of this petal first, and I kind of work backwards. So I'm going in with this depth here on these creases, but then I'm just going to kind of work down instead of from the crease up. And I'm doing that because of that wetness down there. And in the only reason this happened was because the petals next to it are the ones I did right before this big petal. So now we'll go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and focus on some more of the other crevices around the actual flower, and we'll let that area dry just a little bit. And then we'll move on to the center of the card. So I'm just kind of drawing a little bit of this right now, and then I go in and focus on some of those crevices that we haven't actually hit yet. I was just noticing them as I was drawing that. So I'm just going to go in here with some really pigmented color and just see if I can touch on those because I noticed them there at the last minute. So you're just going to see, and that one's still wet. So little wet, more wet than others. So I just wanted to touch on those a little bit, and then we can blend them out just a little bit also. And this is going to darken some of these petals a little bit, but I'm still going to preserve some of that highlight on the end. And it kind of actually makes some of these look a little more even with the other petals. because they had had the crevices done and these two hadn't. So it ends up giving it a lot more color and dimension. I mean, the more you add of the contrasting color, the deeper color, the more contrast you get. So we're going to put this aside now, and I'm going to go ahead and look at these other palettes. I'm going to want to pick out our foliage colors. So I'm just looking to see what I have here in comparison to the palette we're using. Then I look at my color chart, and I really like that it's almost like a seafoam green. So I'm going to wipe up my desk here to get all those purples off and give us some fresh water. And then we're going to go ahead and with the green, the lightest green from this palette, and go ahead and give ourselves a base color. Now I had noticed there in the palette that there is also a darker teal color. So I thought, well, let's do these in two colors instead of just one like we did the flower. So that's what I thought we would do on these, and that would show you how we can use actually two separate colors on our petals. So we'll go ahead and fill all these in, and then we will get a more contrasted look from the dark color of green. I'm just going to add this to all of our petals or our leaves. And I really like how soft this one is here. It's really easy just to drag that out. And I'm not really worrying about, highlights, lowlights, all of that, because we're going to be going in with a darker color. I was drawing up some water right there on the edge just so it wouldn't puddle up on me. But now we're going to go in with this darker color. I wanted to make sure I have not too much water and a clean brush. Oh, I was wanting to make sure they dried. The leaves have to dry. So I'm looking for a center color because those leaves need a little dry time. So I'm going to just get this yellow prepared. We're going to do the center real quick while we're waiting for the leaves to dry. So I'm just going to I activated that with my spray bottle, and now I'm just going to move this paint around and make sure it's good and mixed, and we're just going to use that little bit of yellow and do our center real quick. Super easy. So I'm going to add a little yellow here, and I did notice that there was some purple in the center already that had bled in, which kind of gave it almost a brownish look, but it's very, very light. You can't really even notice it. But I decided to go in with a little bit of brown also to kind of go on the center itself, like the actual center. And then I just kind of went around the edges, and now it looks like it was completely done intentionally. So there's always little tips and tricks you can do to cover up little issues that you come across when you're coloring. Like we did when we accidentally paint our background pink. No reason to start over, you just choose to pivot. So that worked out perfect, just adding a little bit of brown. So now we'll test out our leaves again, and yes, it's dry enough to get it to where it's going to allow me to stay in control and not bleed into the paper. So it's going to bleed when I add the water now, but when I was putting it in its place, it wasn't because I didn't have hardly any water on my brush. But like I said, each time I go over to the right, there's water on my table that I'm picking up, so I can just blot this and blend it out. So I'm going to grab some more there and do the darkest part up under the flower petals. Just make sure all of that, and then I kind of come down the veins of the leaves a little bit too, just to give them a little shape and dimension. And then I'm going to use that water to do the same thing and just lighten it in between. It also darkens up and brightens up the lighter green as well when you do that, when the two mix. It's really pretty, the combination. Gives it a lot more depth. And when you're done, you don't even see that contrasting color, but it's there. In other words, it's not so in your face, but it's definitely there to where it makes that big impact. So I'm showing you that background colors are nice and soothing and relaxing there in the background. So I'm going to look at that little area there that I showed you before, that just going to blend it out just a little bit more right here. Not too much, but just softening that harsh line. That's all it really needed. I'm happy with that. So now we're going to use a little Phil Martin's bleed proof white, and I'm just going to splatter it. I'm just testing it over here to the side. I had sprayed a little bit of water right down into the bottle itself, and that gave me just a super fine mist of splatters. And that's all I wanted. I just wanted a tiny bit, tiny bit. And now I'm going to show you how I do when my paper is warped from watercoloring, or warped for any other reason, like embossing folders, anything like that. I always use double stick adhesive. And in this aspect here, I'm going to use the sheets of double stick adhesive from Altenew. I cut it a tiny bit smaller than the A2 size. And I'm going to place it here on the back. And I've pulled out my scoreboard. And this helps me place it in exactly the right place. You could always use a MISTI or anything with a right angle. But once you peel back this sticky paper and take the backing off it, you're going to put the card base up in the right angle, and you're also going to put this in the right angle. And then you'll have everything line up perfectly. It also straightens and flattens your card base as well, your paper, because between the card base and the adhesive, both strongly adhere together and it flattens you. So thank you for coming by today and checking out my tutorial. I hope you've learned a bunch and you come back and see me really soon. Bye-bye for now.